Welcome to Playing Above the Line. We're a podcast that takes a peek into the daily lives of community and business leaders. Each week, we uncover different views of the path to growth, leadership, and achieving success. I'm Dennis Sheeran.
And I'm Alan Cave. Dennis and I are both shareholders at Hartman, Blackman & Kilgore. We're a full-service accounting and business consulting firm. As CPAs, we've had the unique opportunity to work with many different leaders and decided we wanted a way to share their incredible stories that we've learned along the way.
Well, Alan, here we are for another show.
It is, Dennis. It's a beautiful day in Mobile, Alabama, so why don't you introduce our guest?
I will. We want to welcome to the show today CJ Ezell from the wonderful eastern shore of Mobile Bay, Alabama. CJ, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And just let's start it off. Tell us a little bit more about CJ and what CJ's doing these days.
Like I said, I'm from the Eastern Shore. I live over in Fairhope. I own a couple of businesses over there. One is Point Clear Networks, which is an IT services company that we started in 2010. And then most recently, I started a second business called the Red 5 Agency, which we started last year, about 8 months ago now, which does digital marketing, website design we target the small healthcare vertical, but we do some work outside of that as well.
You've been in technology quite a bit of your career.
Since 2002. I started my first IT company in 2002. That was a company called ASI. Mm-hmm. And in 2004, we picked up the dental vertical as kind of our niche. And so we started growing that business, serving the dental community. And from 2002 to 2010, we grew that business to where we were servicing about 250 dental clients throughout the Southeast. So we had an office in Mobile, an office in Birmingham, and an office over in Destin, Florida. In 2010, we sold that business to Henry Schein, Inc., who's one of the big dental supply companies. When I sold that business, what became Point Clear Networks was spun off of that.
So you started ASI in 2002, but so what led you to that point, though? What's your background? I mean, did you always have a love for technology, or did it kind of evolve? I mean, how did you get from like high school, college to starting a technology company? That's interesting to me.
So hobby turned necessity. So my first career when I graduated high school and went to college, I actually went to school to learn EMS. So I worked in emergency medical services from 1992 to 2000. And during that time, I always had an interest in computers. And that was, the late 90s, early 2000s was kind of the real, when the internet really started to kind of explode and take off, and home computer prices were falling to a point where they were, becoming reasonable, and more people had them and whatnot. And so I remember the first computer that I ever bought for myself was in probably 1996. And I took it home, and the first night I had it, I broke it.
That's an auspicious start.
Yeah, just a little bit.
So I took it back to the store and it was a custom build. So I took it back to the store that had built it, and they showed me what I did and got me back up and running. But it taught me a valuable lesson, which was that if I was going to own a computer and use computers, I needed to know how to work on them and fix them myself. So that really kind of started me down that path of working on computers as a hobby. And when I left EMS in 2000, I started, I was trying to find what I wanted the next thing to be. And ended up getting into sales. And while I was, successful with that, what ended up happening was the company I worked for had multiple locations. And as they learned that I had some technology skills, it became, hey, can you go work on the computers at the other store? And so I ended up spending most of my time running between the two locations, making sure the networks stayed up and running. So eventually I just got to a point where I said, well, I might as well just do this for a career, Mm-hmm. So that's what led me into starting ASI.
I mean, the guy that can work on the computers is always the most in-demand guy, right? I mean,
love them.
Yeah. So you start ASI. And how long since between the time you started to when it was sold?
So we started the company in 2002. So there was about a year and a half period where I worked for a local IT company in Mobile, where I kind of learned the industry, the ins and outs of the industry. And about a year and a half in, I said, you know what, I think I could do this myself. So that was when I started. I started ASI in June of 2002.
So you have to have I would think, an innate entrepreneurial spirit, I would think, to be able to go out on your own, because that's going from a steady paycheck hitting the bank every 2 weeks to I get paid if I perform, but if I don't, it's going to be bad.
Exactly. It was definitely a leap of faith. Fortunately, my wife was very supportive of me making that move. And she was, at the time, she worked for American Express, so we were in a position where we could, I could afford to kind of take that risk, so to speak. But it definitely is. I mean, it's you have to You have to have a lot of faith and belief in yourself, for one thing, to make that leap. But I remember taking $100 out of my last paycheck from the company that I left and using that to buy my business license and get started. And for the first year and a half, we literally built computers on our kitchen table. It was me and one technician, and we worked out of my house. And so that was the beginning of ASI. And after about a year and a half, my wife said, "This is great, but your business is doing well. I want my kitchen back."
I want it to be a kitchen again.
Exactly. So then we moved into our first office, and in early 2004, probably January of 2004, we had built up a nice little network of clients locally. And, we were doing business for pretty much whoever would write us a check, which is always the case when you're starting a new venture, right? And, but we had picked up about a half dozen dental clients, mainly through word of mouth. And one of those clients, this was, like I said, in the early 2000s when digital x-ray was just kind of starting to take off. So one of those clients called me up one day and said, "Hey, come by the office. We need to talk to you." And so I went in, and they started showing me all this digital x-ray equipment they had just bought from at a trade show that they had attended. And I was like, "Well, this is great. What does it have to do with me?" And they said, "Well, you're going to hook this all up." And I said, "Oh, okay." And of course that led to, of course, they needed computers in all of the treatment rooms at that point in time. So then that's when it kind of clicked, and I was like, "Oh, that's how I fit into all of this." What I did know at the time was that the equipment they had bought was Kodak equipment. And so this was back when Eastman Kodak was obviously still a viable company. But Kodak owned a dental division, and they sold digital x-ray equipment direct, and they used third-party contractors, IT companies primarily, to do the installation and integration. And so after we did this office, they reached out to me shortly after that and said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming to Atlanta and sitting down and talking to us about a formal relationship?" So that was what led us down the path of working with dentists almost exclusively, in 2004.
So listening to your story there, you're comfortable with understanding risk.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you have to be. I mean, because there's no guarantee that any business venture is going to be a success. So you have to be, there's always an element of risk to it.
Right. Yeah. And what you described in that entrepreneurial spirit, that's just, it's fun to hear you say that, because I'm sitting there watching you tell this story and hearing how that story is basically, it sounds like every business you've created is that same way. Is that fair?
That would be a fair assessment. Yeah. Matter of fact, I can remember at ASI when we made that decision to focus exclusively on the dental market. I came back and I sat all my employees down and I said, "We're firing all of our clients who aren't dentists." And I remember half the room was, because I had about 4 employees at the time. So half the employees were like, "Okay, this is cool." And the other half looked at me like, "Have you lost your mind?" And actually, one of my employees actually did come to me at the end of that day and say, "Are you serious about this?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Obviously, we're not going to do it tomorrow, right? I mean, we're not just going to fire everybody tomorrow. That wouldn't make any sense. But over the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to develop a plan to where this becomes our, our vertical market. This becomes our niche." He decided he wasn't comfortable with that. And he said, "Hey, I can't go down that path. I don't think you're going to be successful. I think you'll be out of business in 6 months. So let's just part ways." And I said, "Okay, fine. Here's some accounts you can actually take with you." So I gave him about 10 or 12 accounts because he wanted to go out and start his own business. Yeah. And I can certainly understand that. So I said, "Okay, well, here's some accounts that you can use to get your business started."
So you freed up both of you. You gave him something that he was truly interested in. It freed you up to pursue the opportunity.
Exactly.
So let's go back to entrepreneurial spirit a little bit. Where do you believe it came from?
I wish I had an answer for that, but I don't. I mean, I guess looking back, like I said, my first career was in EMS, and I worked in EMS for almost a decade. But I think I always knew, even when I was in EMS, that I really needed, I was one of those people that's just destined to kind of work for themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not that I don't play well with others or anything like that, but they're just, you always look at things, and if you have this mindset of you're looking at something, you're always trying to figure out how you can make it better or how it could be done better. To me, that kind of is indicative of someone who has an entrepreneurial spirit. If you're always trying to figure out how to improve processes or improve things.
Let's talk about influences a little bit. I mean, so you can't really pinpoint where your entrepreneurial spirit came from, but obviously you're a leader. Can you pinpoint any one person or a couple of people who have had an influence on your leadership style and kind of the way you view leadership and the way that you've led your employees over the last few years?
Sure. Yeah. So growing up, and let me preface this by saying I grew up in a single parent home. and not because of divorce or anything like that. But my father passed away of cancer when I was a newborn. So I grew up, and my mom didn't remarry until I was almost 16. So I grew up, in a single parent environment. But I always had, influences, outside influences, to kind of fill the gap there a little bit. And I guess one of those is probably a lady by the name of Marjorie Day, who used to run the 4-H program in Mobile County, short for the Cooperative Extension Service here, for many, many years. She really kind of took me under her wing and helped to teach me some leadership skills and teach me critical thinking and how to evaluate situations. And I learned I learned a ton of things from her. And she obviously has impacted a lot of lives in Mobile over the years. Yeah, but she was probably the first real role model that I had. And her leadership style was very much of the let you make your own mistakes as long as nobody gets hurt kind of thing. But she was of that school of giving you the freedom to make a mistake and then identify that and learn from it. And so she was probably one of my very early influences. And then the other is probably when I worked in EMS, one of my supervisors was a gentleman by the name of Shelton O'Bannon. He ran the communications division for Mobile County EMS. He was one of those bosses who as you're, and we've all had these experiences when you're younger, you always have that one boss that's really hard on you, and at the time you don't understand why. And so he was that person. He was the person that I felt was almost unfairly hard on me. But as I grew older, I realized it was because he saw potential, in me that I didn't see in myself at the time. And so he was pushing me to get better.
So Point Clear Networks or Point Clear Network and Red 5 Agency are your two newest endeavors. So talk a little bit more about those specifically and what you do with them and what they offer.
Sure. So both companies, we're kind of focused in the small healthcare market, and that's strictly just because that's what what I've grown up in and been comfortable around. But so Point Clear Networks, we do IT, what's called managed services. So basically, we do network management, we do desktop support, we do server administration, those sorts of things. But we try to do it in a way that minimizes downtime and works to make sure that your business stays working. So we try to reduce problems before, prevent problems before they happen. So, proactive is a word that's thrown around a lot in the industry, and I hate to say it, but it really is, what we try to do. So, and then Red 5 Agency, I started that company because what I saw out of especially from our small healthcare clients is there's kind of a wave of mergers and acquisitions and things like that are happening in the healthcare world right now, and it's happening in the tech sector as well. Those seem to be the two where I see it most prevalent, but maybe that's just because that's my point of view. But what we see are a lot of smaller practices that are being bought and absorbed by larger out of state entities, and so I'm firmly committed to small business. That's always kind of been a passion of mine. And having gone down that path of sold to a big Fortune 500 company and having lived in that environment for a couple of years and not really enjoying it, I always want to try to help the little guy where I can. So that's why the focus of all my businesses have been in that area. But Red 5 was really something that I started because I wanted to help small solo practitioners and small practices. Some of these guys sell just because they feel like they don't have any choice, right? Like they can't compete with these large companies. So I wanted to be able to help them with that, from a marketing perspective, because these out of town companies, they have huge marketing budgets, right? So you really can't compete with them in terms of dollars spent, right? But you can certainly compete, from a smarter perspective if you know where the better ROIs are and whatnot. And so that was why I started Red 5 Agency, was to kind of help those practices compete, using the internet as an equalizer, so that they didn't feel like they necessarily needed to sell out to these larger groups coming in.
What did it take for you to prepare for that social media switch?
So a lot of it, I think came from the need to market our own business, obviously. Mm-hmm. So we learned a lot about how to do successful small business marketing by marketing our own company. And then there was a lot of education as well. I mean, obviously there's some new skill sets and some new tools and some new schools of thought that you have to kind of, you have to kind of get into. So I've spent probably about the last year and a half really kind of, reading every book on small business marketing that I could find, taking a lot of courses online and traditional and whatnot to kind of make sure that I truly understand, both sides of the business, the marketing side and and the technology side.
Well, I mean, with the prevalence of social media these days, I mean, a reputation can be ruined, I would think, in just in a mere matter of days if somebody puts the wrong thing on social media, whether it's true or not. I mean,
absolutely.
So one of the things you mentioned in your bio is that you provide reputation management software. I have never heard that term before. So what is that? I mean, does it help mitigate some of that risk out there?
So it does, yeah. Kevin O'Leary had a video that he posted not too long ago. Of course, I'm sure most people know who Kevin O'Leary is, but he made a good point about reputations and the fact that 20 years ago, if you made a customer angry, they picked up the phone and they called your 800 number to your corporate office, or they called you and they would, gripe it and kind of get it off their chest and spend 10 or 15 minutes just kind of wearing you out on the phone, and that was the end of it, right? You would say, "Well, I'm sorry you had that experience. What can we do to make this better?" But today it's not like that, right? So today, if a customer has a bad experience, or if they decide they don't like you, they're on this mission to basically ruin you on the internet, right? And so they go to every review site that they can possibly find and leave you a 1-star review and tell the entire world how horrible you are. So what reputation management software, what that does is it's a system that's designed to help you. You can't really get rid of a lot of negative complaints, because some of them are legitimate,
Yeah.
But so you can't really, Google won't take those down, Facebook won't take those down. So your only option is to kind of just flood them with positive reviews. So what our system does is we help automate that process so that we send clients text messages or emails and prompt them to proactively leave you a positive review. And so that's part of what reputation management is trying to manage, because you're always going to, there's always going to be someone who leaves you a negative review, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what part of that process is trying to manage that by flooding out, getting rid of the negative by flooding it with positive reviews.
So where do you see your social media business going?
Well, I think it's, I certainly think it's going to grow, over the next decade for sure, as more and more businesses go online. You can't, the way that we used to advertise 10 or 20 years ago just doesn't work anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And so Google is the direct replacement for the Yellow Pages, right? 20 years ago, most companies, their entire marketing budget was spent on a Yellow Page ad, especially for a small business, right?
And they were not cheap.
No, they were not. They were very expensive. But that was what you did, right? You bought your full page ad in the Yellow Pages and you were done for the year. That was marketing. That was what a lot of small businesses considered marketing. Mm-hmm. And today, that's obviously not the case. There's so many outlets where, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, there's so many social media outlets that are out there that you need to learn, you need to know how to interact with your clients there, because like it or not, that's where they are. Mm-hmm. If you're going to advertise today, it has to be online.
So managed IT services and social media, you're firmly in the technology world. So what is the favorite part of what you do on a day-to-day basis?
So I think the favorite part of what I do is really helping other business owners grow their businesses, right? So the part that I love is when I sit down with a client and they say, "Hey, you know what, we did this and we added 20 new patients this month, or we did this and it made my staff 20% more productive." So when I can make a positive impact on somebody else's business, that's why I do what I do.
Very good. Well, we will get into the get to know CJ portion of the broadcast a little bit more. So, do you have a couple of authors or a couple of books that you can give us that have made an impact on your professional life, personal life, or leadership style over the last few years?
Sure. So from a business standpoint, I would say Mike Michalowicz is probably my favorite business author. And he's written 3 or 4 books, one of them, one called The Pumpkin Plan, which was extremely helpful for us in Point Clear Networks. And basically the premise of the Pumpkin Plan is where he walks you through, identifying your ideal customer, right? So your ideal client avatar. So what he tells you to do is take the top 20% of your income producing clients and then figure out what the commonalities of those clients are. And that's where you build your ideal avatar from. So for us, when we ran through this exercise in-house 5 or 6 years ago, what we discovered was that On the IT side for Point Clear Networks, our ideal client was a practice that had 2 or 3 doctors or had 2 or 3 locations or was a specialist, right? So, and when we started concentrating, we kind of niched down even further than just saying dental as a vertical. When we kind of niched down even further, that's when our business really started picking up, when we started concentrating on small group practices or multi-doctor practices. And then the other book that he's written that I think is should be required reading for every small business owner particularly, is a book called Profit First, where he talks about basically turning the accounting system that most small business owners are used to, upside down and making sure that you take what you need out of the business first, and whatever's left is what you run your business on. So many business owners get caught in the trap of running their business, and then at the end of the day, whatever's left is just what they feel, right. And we kind of feel like we have to do that. I mean, it's like, it's just been ingrained. That's the way it's been done. Right. And of course, the way it's always been done is one of the most dangerous phrases in the English language. Right.
And then we do that. Yeah.
But so he teaches you to do the opposite, right. And to make sure that, whatever that percentage is, whether it's 5%, 10%, 15%, whatever you want your profit margin to be, you take that off the top and you set it aside. And then whatever's left is what you operate your business off of. And so those 2 books have had a profound impact on our business and how we run our day-to-day operations.
Well, listening to you describe those books and then what you've said up until this point, you're a firm believer in not using the shotgun approach when it comes to client. I mean, you were a big believer, obviously, in the niche.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When you're starting a business, you have to take, business from wherever it comes from. That probably runs contrary to what a lot of gurus will say. A lot of people will say, start your business with a niche. And you certainly, if you've got a lot of capital that you can sit on, you can certainly do that. But if you're bootstrapping, you got to take business from wherever. But I certainly do believe in identifying what your niche is going to be very early on, and then working towards that. Once you identify that ideal client avatar, that's where you spend your resources on.
Gotcha. Yeah, good point. All right, 2 more questions. So we open your iTunes, your Spotify, go to your presets on your radio in your car. What do we find? What kind of music do we listen to?
Oh, wow. So I probably have a pretty eclectic mix. Psychologists might have a lot of fun looking at my iTunes collection. So it really kind of runs the gamut. So I listen to a lot of music soundtracks. So like right now, the Westworld soundtrack is one that I really like. Yeah, there's some folk music in there. So like the Civil Wars is a group that I've listened to quite a bit. But you can also scroll around and you'll find some Bon Jovi and
I would say eclectic is a pretty good description. The Civil Wars. I don't believe I've ever heard of that one. So
I haven't either. Don't know that one. Well, are you asking the question today?
I am going, and this is still in the rotation. I'm going to ask it.
Okay,
so
go ahead.
I haven't found a better one. So as you're driving back across the Bayway today to the Eastern Shore, you get stopped by a spaceship. He lands in the middle of the interstate. You can't go any further. The door opens. Little alien walks down. He says, "CJ, take me to your leader." Where are you going to take him?
Oh, wow. Take me to your leader. Well, I'm not going to take him to 1600 Pennsylvania. That's for sure.
Fair enough.
So I don't know. Probably maybe the UN. I don't know.
Okay. A lot of leaders there. Yeah,
that's right.
Good.
Well, CJ, it's been a pleasure. It goes fast, and we could cover a lot more. But we want to thank you for taking some time and
thanks for having me.
Getting to know you and having a conversation about what you're doing. And look forward to maybe doing it again sometime.
Sounds good.
Thanks, CJ.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for listening to our podcast today. To never miss an episode, subscribe to Playing Above the Line at iTunes and anywhere else you get your podcast. And be sure to leave us a rating. We'd love to know what you think about our show.
To contact us or to stay connected, follow us on social media at HBKCPAS on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.